My name is Carol Whitaker. I'm 74 years old, retired now, and living in a small apartment just outside of Charlotte. If you had asked me 5 years ago what kind of mother I was, I would have told you I did everything I could. Not perfect, of course, but steady. I raised my son, Jeremy, on my own after my husband passed in a car accident when Jeremy was just 10. I worked double shifts, cooked every meal, paid every bill, and never missed a school play. I thought love meant showing up. Even when you were running on empty, I didn't ask for praise. I didn't expect gifts on Mother's Day or big gestures. I just wanted him to have a good life. And for a long time, I thought he did. He graduated, got a job, married a woman he adored. I watched from a quiet distance, proud, always proud. But pride can be a funny thing. It kept me from asking questions, from noticing the little signs. I told myself his silence was just busyness, his coldness just personality. I thought I was being selfless. Turns out, I was just being forgotten. This is not the kind of story I ever imagined I would tell. It's about what happens when a mother gives everything and slowly realizes she was never part of the plan. Not really. This story doesn't start with a fight or a falling out. It starts with a housewarming party, a blueberry pie, and a sentence I was never supposed to hear. But maybe it really started long before that, with all the things I gave up, and all the ways I convinced myself that was enough. My husband, Michael, died on a rainy Thursday morning. I was 39. One minute we were making weekend plans. The next I was sitting in a hospital hallway with my hands shaking and no idea how to tell our son. Jeremy was 10. I still remember how small he looked in his soccer uniform when I picked him up from practice that afternoon. I didn't have the right words. I just held him while he cried. And when he finally fell asleep that night, I sat by the window until morning trying to figure out what life was going to look like now. Those first few months were a blur. Bills piled up, the house felt too quiet, and I went back to work at the credit union 3 weeks after the funeral. There wasn't time to grieve properly, not when there was rent, food, school supplies, and a boy who needed some kind of normal. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I'd wake up at 5, pack lunches, pay bills, and squeeze in quick dinners before falling asleep in the clothes I wore to work. Jeremy didn't complain. He was always a quiet kid, smart but closed off. Like he'd already decided the world could change without warning and he'd better be ready for it. I tried to be both parents, but there were gaps. I missed parent-teacher nights, forgot permission slips, and sometimes served frozen dinners 3 nights in a row. But I never forgot birthdays. I always left little notes in his lunchbox, even into high school when he pretended not to see them. I kept a scrapbook of every certificate, every picture day, and on Sundays, I made pancakes even when all I wanted was to sleep. At night, after he went to bed, I took community college classes online. I had always been decent with numbers, so I earned a certificate in accounting. That led to a better job at the tax office, which eventually became something close to a career. It was never glamorous, but it was enough. We didn't travel or buy new clothes often, but Jeremy never went without. I made sure of that. There were times I worried I was too strict or too tired or just not enough. But every time he brought home an A or got called out for helping someone in class, I told myself I must be doing something right. I didn't care that he didn't hug me much. I figured he'd come around in his own way, in his own time. I let him keep his space and tried to be the constant he could always come back to. By the time he graduated high school, I felt this huge wave of relief. Like maybe, just maybe, we had made it through. He got into a decent college on scholarship, found a job not long after, and seemed to be building a life. He didn't call often, but I didn't push. I figured silence meant he was doing okay. And I was proud of him, proud of myself. Looking back now, I see how much I gave. Not just money or time, but all the little invisible things. The dreams I put on hold, the fear I swallowed, the loneliness I never mentioned. I don't regret any of it. But I think a part of me believed it would come back to me someday. That he'd remember not just what I gave, but why. When Ella was born, I felt something in me light back up, holding her for the first time, wrapped in that pink hospital blanket. I remembered what it felt like to be needed in the most innocent way. Her eyes were big and curious, and when she smiled, It wasn't polite or practiced. It was pure. I never tried to insert myself into their life. I knew better than to offer too much advice or ask too many questions. Sabrina was the kind of woman who made it clear when boundaries were being tested. So I kept my visits short, my voice soft, and my expectations lower than I ever admitted out loud. But Ella and I found each other anyway, in the quiet places no one else really looked. On Sunday mornings, we baked blueberry muffins in my tiny kitchen. She'd line the paper cups and sneak chocolate chips when she thought I wasn't watching. At night, we'd sit on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around our legs, looking at stars and naming them after silly things like dogs or cereal boxes. Sometimes in the grocery store, she'd lean close and whisper secrets, like which apples were best or which cereal her mom didn't let her have but she really wanted. That child became my soft place to land. No matter how awkward the grown-up dynamics were, she never made me feel like I was too much. With her, I didn't have to earn my place. I could just be grandma, the one who always had a clean apron, a puzzle halfway finished, and a freezer full of popsicles. I didn't expect to be the center of their world. I knew that wasn't realistic. I just hoped I'd always be close enough to matter. Close enough for a birthday call, a school recital invite, maybe a spare chair at Thanksgiving. With Ella, I thought that was still possible. I thought I'd carved out a little space that would always be mine. It started with a cup of tea and a quiet afternoon. I was sitting by the window, the same one where Ella and I once watched squirrels chase each other across the fence, and I found myself flipping through my old finance binder. It wasn't something I did often anymore, but I wanted to check on things. My pension from the tax office, the modest investments I'd kept safe and boring, the Social Security checks that came like clockwork. Everything was in order, neat rows, labeled tabs, predictable. That day, something shifted. I looked around my apartment. Every piece of furniture had a story. The armchair with the worn-out left arm, the chipped teacup I refused to replace, the crocheted blanket my sister gave me when she was still alive. I realized I didn't want anything else. Not really. My knees hurt too much for long flights. My taste for shopping had faded years ago. So I asked myself, what am I saving for? What is all this caution and preparation building toward? I thought about Ella, about her growing taller every time I saw her, about how their neighborhood had changed. The park down the street where she used to play was now full of broken swings and too many strangers. Jeremy mentioned once that she was starting to sleep with her bedroom light on. Sabrina had brushed it off, but it stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about how much better her life could be in a place that felt safer, a place where she could have a backyard to chase fireflies in, a window big enough to place a telescope. That night, I made a decision, not dramatic, just quiet and sure. I wouldn't tell anyone yet, not even my friend Patty, who normally knew everything before I did. This was something I wanted to do without committee or permission. I would buy them a house, a better one, something clean, stable, and full of light. Not a mansion, not extravagant, but something a child could grow in and remember with joy. I started doing the research myself, browsed listings on my old laptop, called a real estate agent Patty had once recommended. Her name was Karen, and she didn't blink when I told her I was buying for my son and his family. She just nodded and got to work. Over the next few weekends, we toured properties. Some too new, others falling apart under fresh paint. But I took notes. I calculated. I asked questions about schools and traffic and water pressure, all with my checkbook tucked deep in my purse. When I saw the house on Willow Creek Lane, I knew. It had 4 bedrooms, a kitchen with natural light, and a backyard with a wide, shaded tree. It was a little more than I planned to spend, but I could make it work. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the feeling, and that house felt like a gift I could finally afford to give. Before I told them, I rehearsed it in my head for days. I pictured Jeremy's face, imagined Sabrina's surprise, even thought about what Ella would say when she saw the treehouse potential out back. I wasn't looking for a thank you. I just wanted them to have something I never did. A fresh start, a safer place, a home they wouldn't have to outgrow. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I wanted to be remembered for it, not praised, just remembered. When I first told Jeremy about the house, he looked at me like I just handed him the moon. He said it was too much. that he couldn't possibly accept it. I believed him. For a moment, I really did. Then Sabrina called later that night. Her voice was smooth and bright, polished like one of those department store displays. She said thank you, of course. But there was something in the way she said it. Like the thank you was just the appetizer and the real ask hadn't arrived yet. A few days later, she asked if they could look at a few more homes, just to compare. I didn't mind. I wanted them to be happy. But with each showing, the homes grew bigger. 2-story foyers, double islands in the kitchen, soaking tubs, his and hers walk-in closets. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Then I started running numbers again. I could stretch, barely. If I dipped into my emergency savings, if I trimmed a few corners. One afternoon, after we toured a house with a wine cellar and outdoor fireplace, Sabrina leaned over and asked about the stock I'd sold last year. My heart paused. I hadn't told anyone about that, not even Patty. I asked her how she knew. She said Jeremy mentioned it, that I'd talked about it over lunch, but I hadn't. I remembered that lunch clearly. We talked about Ella's math test and a recipe for lemon chicken, not my finances. That night, I sat with my spreadsheets. I told myself it didn't matter how she knew. Maybe Jeremy saw something in a drawer. Maybe I had mentioned it and forgot. The truth was, I didn't want to believe they were pushing. I wanted to believe this was still a gift. My gift. Something I chose, not something I was being maneuvered into. We finally found a house in Maple Ridge, bigger than the first one. Quite a bit more expensive. But it had a yard Ella could run in and a breakfast nook with sunlight pouring through in the morning. Sabrina loved the layout. Jeremy liked the garage. Ella picked out her room and twirled in circles until she got dizzy. And I just stood in the living room, trying to ignore the twist in my gut. I told them we could do it, but we needed full insurance coverage. That kind of property had to be protected. Jeremy frowned. $5,000 a year, he said. It's clean. The inspection came back perfect. I stood my ground, at least a little. Peace of mind? I told him. You can't replace that. He looked to Sabrina, who smiled tight and said, maybe we could revisit it later. It was subtle, nothing loud or dramatic. But something had changed. Gratitude had turned into assumption. The surprise had shifted into expectation. And I was no longer the giver. I was the provider. The background character who made the dream possible, but wasn't quite part of it. Still, I said nothing. I nodded, I smiled, I kept moving forward. I told myself it was for Ella. That one day, she'd look back and remember the backyard, the tree she climbed, the room with the window seat. I just had to get through this part. I didn't realize I was already halfway to losing myself. The housewarming party was Sabrina's idea. She wanted everything just right. Printed invitations, a catered buffet from a restaurant I couldn't pronounce, white roses in tall glass vases. She called it a celebration of new beginnings. I just wanted to see Ella happy. I baked a blueberry pie that morning and wrapped it in foil. The same ceramic dish I'd used every Thanksgiving since Jeremy was a boy. I arrived early to help. Sabrina didn't need me. She was already directing servers and straightening throw pillows that didn't look like anyone ever used them. Jeremy stood near the back patio with a drink in hand, talking to someone in a fitted suit. When he saw me, he waved briefly, then turned back to his conversation. I told myself he was just busy. Ella ran up and hugged me around the waist. She wanted to show me her room again, even though I'd seen it before. The telescope was by the window. She said the stars looked brighter here. I kissed the top of her head and told her she was right. That moment held me together longer than I realized. Guests started arriving, people I didn't recognize, neighbors, coworkers, old friends of Jeremy's I hadn't seen since high school. Everyone was dressed in muted colors, holding wine glasses, commenting on the light fixtures and crown molding. Every time Jeremy introduced me, it was the same line. This is my mom. She bought us the house. The words stung more than they should have. They weren't cruel, just hollow. Like I was a line in a brochure, a feature, not a person who'd worked 40 years, skipped vacations, lived modestly, and cashed out almost everything so they could live in a better zip code. I found a seat in the corner of the living room. The couch was expensive, the cushions untouched. I watched the party unfold around me like a movie I hadn't been cast in. Laughter rose and fell in waves. Sabrina moved through the crowd like she belonged there. Perfect posture, careful smiles. I felt like an extra with no lines. At some point, I remembered the pie. I hadn't seen it on the table. I slipped quietly toward the kitchen, not wanting to interrupt anything. The hallway was quiet, the air cooler near the back of the house. That's when I heard my name. Sabrina's voice floated through the kitchen doorway, light and just slightly slurred. She said I nearly cried during the toast, like I thought I was giving them a kidney. A few people laughed, then Jeremy's voice chimed in, casual, like it didn't matter. She gave us most of her savings. What else is she gonna do with it at her age? Someone else joked about whether they were worried I'd want to move in. Sabrina answered, sweet and mocking, that they made it clear early on. They needed their own space. The last thing they wanted was an old woman watching their every move. I stood frozen. My feet refused to move. My hands clenched around the door frame. The voices blurred together, but those words kept repeating in my head. An old woman. A burden. Not a blessing. Not even family. Just something to avoid. I pushed open the kitchen door. The room went silent like a switch had been flipped. Sabrina's glass was halfway to her mouth. Jeremy turned toward me with wide eyes, mouth slightly open. No one spoke. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just looked at them and said I forgot my dish. It was sitting on the counter, untouched. I picked it up slowly. The ceramic was warm from the room, heavy in my arms. Jeremy took a step forward and started to say something. I held up my hand. I heard everything. I said, Sabrina tried to smile and said it was just a joke. No, I replied. It wasn't. I walked out without looking back. Not one person tried to stop me. Not Jeremy. Not even Ella. Outside, the night air felt cooler. The voices inside faded behind the door. I walked to my car with the pie in my arms and my dignity tucked somewhere underneath it. I didn't cry. Not then. I just drove home in silence, with only the sound of my own breath for company. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the dish still in front of me. I didn't touch the pie. I didn't turn on the lights. The quiet pressed in from every corner. I had given everything, not just money, but time, love, faith, and a lifetime of small, invisible things. And all it took to tear it down was a single moment of truth I was never meant to hear. I sat at the kitchen table for hours without moving. The pie was still on the counter, untouched, its scent fading as the night stretched out around me. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't change clothes. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and a heaviness in my chest I couldn't name yet. My body was still, but my mind kept circling back to what I'd heard. I tried to remember the exact tone of Jeremy's voice, tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, even now. But I couldn't forget the way he laughed. Not loud, just easy. Like it had all been nothing to him. I thought of him as a boy, curled next to me on the couch after his father's funeral, clutching my sleeve like he was afraid I'd disappear too. I remembered the nights he couldn't sleep, the way he whispered from the hallway asking if he could crawl into my bed just for a little while. I remembered his hand in mine on the first day of school, his voice calling out when he had a nightmare. All those small things I thought meant something permanent. Maybe I imagined more than was really there. Maybe he outgrew me a long time ago and I just didn't see it. Or maybe he never saw me the way I saw him. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the money, not the joke, but the slow, dawning truth that I might have meant less to him than I ever dared believe. There were no tears that night, just a kind of quiet unraveling, like threads coming loose from something I'd spent decades stitching together. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums just under the surface, loud in your ears even when nothing's happening. I stared out the window into the dark, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt alone. Not because I had no one, but because the people I loved most had decided I didn't belong. The call came just after 7 the next morning. I was still in my robe, halfway through my first cup of coffee, when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick up anyway. It was Jeremy. His voice was rushed, almost frantic. He said there was a problem with the house. Something about the foundation. Cracks, he said. A neighbor noticed them. The inspectors came that morning. They said part of the structure was at risk of collapse. I sat down slowly, listening but not reacting. He kept talking, throwing out numbers. Repairs could cost hundreds of thousands. He and Sabrina didn't know what to do. They were being told they might have to move out. He said they couldn't afford to fix it, couldn't sell it, couldn't stay. Then came the question I knew was coming. Could I help? For a second, I went quiet. My hands were cold even though the morning sun was coming through the window. He said they hadn't gotten full insurance, just the basic coverage. If we had done what you said, he added, maybe this would be different. I didn't say anything. I just kept my hand wrapped around the warm mug, grounding myself. He kept going, please, Mom, you're the only one who can help us. My instinct was still to try, to find a way, but something inside me stayed still. I remembered the kitchen, the laughter, the words I was never meant to hear. And I realized I had nothing left to give, not because I didn't care, but because I finally saw the cost of always giving. I told him I couldn't help. He went quiet, like he didn't understand. Then he asked again, this time with disbelief. What do you mean you can't? I told him I had spent nearly everything I had on that house. What's left is what I need to live. He didn't respond right away. Then he said if they lost the house, they might end up on the street. I reminded him they still had the old house, the one they said was too small, the one they left behind without a second glance. He said they couldn't go back. That wasn't an option. I said that sounded more like pride than necessity. Then he accused me of punishing him. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and said the words that had been sitting in my chest for days. This isn't punishment. This is a boundary. He didn't say anything after that. I didn't wait for him to try again. I told him I had to go, then hung up the phone. The silence returned. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt like peace. It felt like something solid under my feet. For the first time in a very long time, I had chosen myself. And I wasn't sorry. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. This time, I knew the moment I answered that the call was different. There was no panic in his voice, no desperation, just quiet. He said he wasn't calling to ask for anything. He said he just needed to talk. I didn't respond right away. I waited, guarded, not out of anger, but because something in me had shifted. He said he'd been thinking a lot about the house, the party, the things he didn't stop. He admitted he let Sabrina take the lead far too often and that he stood by when he should have stood up. He said he laughed when he should have defended me. He told me he realized he'd treated me like a bank, like a background presence instead of the person who gave him everything. He said the worst part wasn't the money. It was how small I must have felt in a room full of people who barely knew me. He didn't make excuses, just owned it, clumsily. But honestly, I listened, still unsure of how to feel. I'd imagined an apology before, but not like this. This one didn't come with flowers or a plan, just a quiet voice on the other end of the line trying to fix something that might not be fixable. He said he and Sabrina had started counseling, that he wanted to be better. For Ella, for himself, maybe even for me. I let the silence hang between us for a few seconds. Then I said what came naturally. That's a start. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't open any doors. But I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not joy, not relief, just the faintest trace of peace, the kind that comes when someone finally says the thing you were waiting to hear. Not perfectly, but truthfully, the morning I left, the air smelled like spring. I stood on the train platform with my suitcase by my feet and a paper bag of ginger cookies tucked under my arm. Walter waited beside me, calm and patient, wearing that ridiculous wide-brimmed hat he always joked about. We were heading to a beach town his nephew owned a place in, just for a few months, he said. Some fresh air, a little quiet, nothing too fancy. It sounded perfect. Ella came to see me off. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. She asked if I'd send pictures of the ocean and promised to call every Sunday, no matter what. I told her I'd hold her to that. She reached into her backpack and gave me a little pebble with a heart drawn on it in marker. For your windowsill? She said. So you don't forget home. Jeremy came too. He stood a few steps back, hands in his pockets, watching but not interrupting. When Ella pulled away, he stepped forward. He didn't say much, just that he hoped I found peace where I was going, that I deserved it. I nodded and said, "Thank you." We didn't hug, but for once, the silence between us didn't feel empty. The train pulled in. Walter helped with my suitcase and handed me a cup of coffee he'd grabbed earlier. As I boarded, I looked back one last time. Ella was waving. Jeremy stood still, but his eyes followed me. I gave a small wave, then turned and found my seat. As the train pulled away, I felt something shift. Not sadness, not regret, just lightness. Walter looked over and asked if I was ready for the next chapter. I smiled without answering, because the truth was, I already knew. I had started writing it the moment I said no. The moment I chose not to give what I didn't have anymore. I wasn't running, I wasn't punishing. I was simply stepping into a life I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. I was Carol Whitaker, a woman who finally chose herself.